Welcome to Ahead of the Game, a podcast brought to you by the Digital Marketing Institute. I'm your host, Will Francis, and today I'll be talking to Faisal Laljee all about entrepreneurship in marketing. Faisal, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Very well, thanks. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I love the sound of this topic. Do you think that entrepreneurship attracts risk takers and it requires some form of comfort with risk?
I think I am more of a risk taker, but I think there are different profiles. You'd be surprised how many introverts end up being entrepreneurs as well.
Yes, yes, true. I think there's lots of different things that drives people to be entrepreneurs. Like, what are the things that you've noticed that sort of commonalities that drive people towards entrepreneurship?
There are people who wish to live with purpose,
Mm.
who really believe in a cause, and no matter who they are, no matter what their personality, they want to pursue that cause. And I believe they make for excellent entrepreneurs. There are also others who want to do something that's their own, like myself. And I
Mm.
think that's the other sort of path. There are many other profiles, but those two come to mind immediately.
Interesting. And just tell us what are you working on at the moment then?
So I help smaller businesses achieve growth, whether it's through growth hacking, whether it's through the right kind of marketing. I like working with small businesses. I started my career working in big businesses, Deloitte, H&R Block, which are US-based companies, AT&T,
Mm.
Dell, so really large businesses. And even when I moved to the UK about 13 years ago, my first role was with a big company called Telefonica. And I think at some point I decided, during my journey, look, I need to do something on my own. So I did my startup, which is still running. So today what I do is continue to work on my own startup as well as provide services to other growth businesses to help them achieve scale.
Nice. Have you always worked in marketing?
I have 25 years and counting. I'm
Right.
almost afraid to admit that because it makes me seem a bit older.
It's funny that I've started to feel that as well. You don't want to make yourself sound like you're probably out of date by saying that you've been in it for decades. But what have been the biggest shifts you've seen over that time in marketing?
The largest shift has been the shift into digital. When I
Mm.
first started, digital was a very small portion of the overall marketing spend. I remember at H&R Block, we would um, primarily focus on direct mail, telemarketing. And there was something called voicemail broadcasting where you could actually leave a voicemail on somebody's landline without the phone even ringing. So
No way.
yes.
I didn't know about that.
So that was a really cool way. It was avoiding the dialers calling and the telemarketers doing warm transfers. It was a way to leave a message on people's answering machines, and then they would just all of a sudden see it blinking.
Wow.
They would actually have to just call back to see if they were interested or to even get their number removed.
Hmm.
So that was a really cool thing we did back then. But those were the key channels for us at the time. Email was barely getting off the floor. Um, there was no Google Ads to speak of. This is about 2001 that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's just around the time Google was rolling out the AdWords.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? I mean, but because some people would say that, well, yeah, okay, the technology's changed, the means have changed, but the job hasn't really changed. It's still making an offer, a proposition, and finding creative ways to put that in front of people. I mean, do you believe at its basis that's still what marketing is?
Absolutely. The number one rule in marketing is finding your customer,
Yeah.
selling to that customer, positioning yourself to that customer, differentiating yourself from the competition so that the customer can perceive you in the right way. Those are the key tenets of marketing, and they've always been.
Yeah, true. So these startups that you work with, what are the most common problems that you find when you go into those businesses?
The problems vary. Sometimes there's too much focus on getting it just right before making a soft launch. Sometimes it's the getting around to delivering the MVP. But most commonly, it's about finding the right customer. You know, most of the time, this is the biggest problem. People don't know who their customers are, and when they do, they may not know how to price their product correctly, or they're too afraid to put the right price out there for fear of lack of acceptance. So these are sort of the problems I see in taking new products to market or having your startup get off the ground.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, definitely, I see that a lot of marketers they don't maybe spend enough time on research. You know, they feel that it's their job to just get marketing, like get some ads live, get some stuff live, without doing that research into, as you say, who the audience is, what they actually need, what they'll respond to, what they'll pay for, and how much. Right.
Right.
That's interesting. I mean, I think that the and yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs they're full of ideas and they struggle to execute. Whether that's being entrepreneurial in marketing or literally, entrepreneurial in business, just getting the stuff made and in front of people. That's the challenge, I think, for some people. Do you come across that challenge?
Yes, people have tons of ideas, and realizing them how to actually get started is the
Mm.
biggest challenge. And I often find that people start working on the product right away. For example, recently I was mentoring a young startup out of a university where I do some mentoring work.
Mm.
And they were talking about launching a service that would target university students. Um, and they wanted to build a product. How would it look? Who would be using it within the university? How would the transaction take place? But all of this was really getting ahead of themselves, you know, and this is no criticism on anyone. I think entrepreneurs by their nature are people who love to get things done, who want to move fast, move forward. When they have an idea, they want to start to put it out there. But the key thing here is to understand, well, what is really the market for this? Do you have really a good idea, or is it just good idea to you? Many people find that they feel like there's a need, there's a hole in the market because they feel they couldn't actually find something. But the reality is you can't just take an existing idea and put a slightly different spin on it and say, well, I've got a new different audience for this. And that's where people end up getting stuck as well.
I saw a thing on LinkedIn. I see a lot of things on LinkedIn like this, but I saw a thing on LinkedIn the other day that was like, you know, a true entrepreneur is someone who gets it out there when it's 70% done. In meaning that there's such urgency to move forward that obviously it's that old adage of don't let perfect be the enemy of done or something like that. Do you think that's obviously always the way forward? Are there problems with that idea at all?
No, I think that is really the way forward because you really don't know what the product should be until and unless you roll out some version of it,
Hmm.
get some people to actually play with that product. I mean, if it's a B2C versus B2B, it depends on the product itself. But in my experience, the sooner you get it in front of your customers, the better off you are because they might come back and tell you something which completely changes the direction you're taking this. And it's not just feedback from one person, right? You're not doing user acceptance testing with a small group, but you have to roll it out to a decent sample size of people and spend a lot of time with them, walking them through it and seeing their reaction and what are their questions, what are they umming and ahhing about. and then learning from that to really input back into the product.
No, I agree. Because personally, my take is it's the same in marketing, right? I think that, I mean, my sort of, I wouldn't say hot, but like warm take on marketing is I think people get way too caught up in the strategizing and planning. And really, if we're really honest with ourselves, you will only know what works when you start just getting stuff in front of people, right? And I do think I see a lot of marketers just spending far too long in PowerPoint and Excel, and they just need to kind of buckle up and get a bit brave and just put stuff out there. I think. So how can we apply some of that entrepreneurship thinking to marketing? Do you think?
In order to kick off your idea, the first thing you need to do is talk to your customers.
True. Yeah, it's true that, isn't it? I mean, so it's working out what their problems and pain points are, isn't it? And what solves that person's issue most immediately.
Correct. And
Um,
how much they're willing to pay for it.
yeah, because something I've noticed in the marketing conversation recently is a bit of an attack on the idea of audience personas, which has always been something I've subscribed to. I've always been like, you really need to profile your prospect. You need to understand what their likely job title and seniority and interests and psychographics are and all that kind of thing. But I've seen people really kind of attack that a bit recently and say that, I mean, it's a good point that, demographic profiling is less relevant than it used to be because we're all so different. And just because someone's 35 and female doesn't really say as much about them as it did 50 years ago. But where do you stand on, and what do you think about that? Do you think creating personas is a good sort of place to start?
It's not the be all end all for marketing. It is a useful exercise. I do subscribe to that as well.
Mm,
And it certainly helps when you're trying to scale up your business. But when you're an early stage startup, when you're really just trying to build your product, get it out to market, I would say there's just one persona you need to focus on, and that's the
yeah.
customer whose problem you're trying to solve. I mean, let me give you an example. We launched KidSitter, which is the childcare startup that I launched with a couple of other colleagues of mine as co-founders.
Mm,
We launched this business in 2015. Initially, we had a very singular vision that we wanted to target time-poor families with young children based in London. So it worked for us to narrow that down in a way where we knew, okay, that is the typical profile of our customer. Now, does that evolve over time? Absolutely. But
mm,
when you start off, if you try to bite off too much and you say, well, my profile is also not just London, but outside of the M25, and it's also out in the suburbs, and it's going all the way up to a different city or going all the way to Plymouth. I don't know. It doesn't work because now you're trying to fulfill something that maybe is two, three levels removed from what your core business should be.
yeah.
You cannot possibly serve all of that with what you're trying to do when you're starting off.
That density is important, and it's not just about metropolitan people on the ground density. It's something about word of mouth and the network effect, right? That where that density is important. Do you think?
That's absolutely right. You have to have an easy way to access that group.
Mm,
And in doing so, a good way to do that is to also make sure that that group is connected to similar groups.
mm,
An example of this, when I was first starting off, and I should probably tell you a little bit about the book that I'm sort of preaching here.
oh,
When I joined a lot of parenting groups on Facebook,
mm,
most of them were moms groups at the time. I would sit in on conversations, and then if they had a coffee meetup at a Starbucks locally,
mm,
I'd actually amble on to those meetings and sit and listen to their challenges and actually then raise my hand and ask questions and then have an opportunity to engage with them. And guess what? Those people that used us from those types of meetings for childcare ended up being our most loyal long-term customers. Because we were there, we were talking to them, we engaged them, we built that trust, and in fact, we got a lot of referral business from that as well.
Fair play to you for turning up to those meetings. I think a 9 out of 10 people would have felt too maybe awkward and embarrassed or something to just show up. I think a lot of us like the safety of being just behind our laptops and like, isn't there a tool that can do this for me? So showing up is great.
I think that as an entrepreneur, you have to develop thick skin and overcome
Mm.
the fear of rejection, you know, and awkwardness. There's plenty of that to go around, but you have to just overcome and deal with it.
Well, that also actually is something I want to ask you about in marketing, that fear of rejection and failure. Because if we say that marketing's one big experiment, and it kind of is, because no one really knows what's going to happen, that's what keeps it interesting. How do we deal with the fact that inevitably some stuff that we deploy will fail and we will feel like a great idea for an ad was ultimately we were rejected because people didn't click the ad? Is that something that you tell people they need to prepare for?
Not at all. I think that it is it is something that is just part and parcel of pretty much anything. Product is the same way, technology is the
Yeah.
same way. You might pick a software to implement within your organization, and 2 years later they're bought out by Microsoft, and then what? So now you're ending up paying double for the same thing. You've put in a lot of time and effort implementing something. You can't just walk back out of it. So I think that uncertainty is part and parcel of any function of any business. Operations is the same. There are supply chain delays in a process or something happens globally, macroeconomically, and
Mm.
everything that you do goes out the window and you have to have contingency plans, etc. So I don't lose sleep over what works and what doesn't work. I try to tell people that you've got to try everything. And yet know that some things are not going to work. And to make sure you de-risk that, don't go all guns blazing in one area. First, test it out and see what's happening and monitor it. And that's just growth hacking, isn't it? I mean, you've got to basically, the definition of growth hacking is there are three key components of it. One is minimum resources, maximum impact, and the way it's done is through experimentation and measurement. So you put all those three components together, you're basically experimenting in small ways and fixing, analyzing, fixing, experimenting. You're doing that whole cycle.
Mm.
And then you've got obviously minimum resources, maximum output. So this is something that is really, really, for me as a marketeer, that's the most fun part. And it's equally great when something doesn't work because you can say, okay, I know that doesn't work.
I've seen this kind of boast that, oh, we got to so many customers or so much monthly recurring revenue with no marketing. And that's almost become this kind of like flex, this boast that some startups will make. Now, I have then seen people counter that and say, well, actually, by going around boasting about that, you're making other people feel bad for, which is most people, for actually deploying and paying for marketing in launching products, which is totally normal. What do you think about that? Do you aim to rely on essentially organic growth? Is there a point at which you'll start to spend money, or do you just need to launch the rocket straight from the launch pad and you start spending straight away? I mean, do you sort of have a take on that?
Yeah, I think if it's a consumer business, then you've got to immediately go to a paid advertising
Mm.
to start to understand whether you've got it right. How do you test your product market fit without customers who've actually gone through the exercise of finding you, clicking on you, and discovering you, and then starting to try to use you? Um, to even get to your next iteration, you need customers, and for that you need paid ads. Organic takes time. I mean, once you and again, your definition of organic isn't necessarily free, no
No,
matter
true.
what it is, right? One of the ways I remember was we were running Google Ads, and our first customer cost us about 800 pounds, you know, at the time. And that's ridiculous. The next customer cost half that. The next customer cost half that. So then at some point you get settled down to a happy sort of a equilibrium where it's relatively stable because the algorithms and your website, everything that you put out there takes time to sort of settle into a rhythm.
Mm.
Similarly, if one of the things at the time I remember supplementing that Google traffic was by putting myself, as I said, into those Facebook groups. And one of the growth hack that I did early on that worked really well was I said, we'll give you free 3 hours of childcare, right? And so we were selling that product. And our big thing was, would people trust us if we were to say we are the right people to trust with your child? And
Mm.
so, we said, what if it's free? And guess what? The uptake was huge, huge. So we ended up delivering on that promise. And then those people, a lot of them, use us again and again and again. And so that sort of gave us a great idea of how we were presenting ourselves, how we built trust, a lot of things. And we wouldn't have had that. And that's the true meaning of growth hacking, where you sort of, yes, you spent a little bit, but it was less than the cost of, acquiring customers through Google. It
Yeah.
wasn't too scalable, but it was in a way where we acquired a few hundred customers and really got to know them. And then, in exchange, they were willing to share their ideas because you told them that we're launching something new. Uh, so it's really interesting, and so that's sort of like a consumer business model where I would say you've got to do that growth hacking, you've got to do the Google ads, and organic will happen over time. And anyway, things like building organic presence online, it takes time and resources. They're not free. You've got to write content, you've got to be able to talk about it on social media, you've got to be able to do a lot of things, and for that you need resources. Now, if you're a B2B business, then you just need to find one customer who's willing to partner with you. And so you're probably going to have to go to an event where you can find potential customers or partners who can introduce you to their customers because maybe you're a complementary business. So it's a very different approach. But again, I would say that finding those initial customers, however you might get them, is your number one priority once you've decided to open the doors.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Um, what do you think right now, today, are the most underrated tactics for growth hacking? Think of any?
Yes, I think if I were to think about, what we did, this turning your early customers into advocates, I would say, is one of the most underrated things that you could be doing. It really helps when you get those early customers and you show them your full hand and say,
Yeah.
this is what we're trying to do.
We
You
need your
are
help.
our early customers, and we
Mm.
want you to try this out. And we want you to tell us what would you do differently. And when you're asking people for help, they actually like that. People, inherently, people like to help people. And so surprisingly, they will open up and they will share things with you, and they don't expect much in return, to be honest. It's just people are nice, they like to help. So I think that's really the most underrated source of information, of feedback into your marketing strategy, your product strategy, your customer strategy, all of those things.
Yeah, true. I suppose I've when I've been approached, when I've been sort of utilized like that as a customer, my thought about it has always been, well, if I like the service they're providing, I want them to continue doing business for purely selfish reasons. So I want them to grow and thrive because I want them to still be here in a year's time. So there's that motivation as well, I think. And if you're providing value to people, well, you'll know about it because people will want to help you, won't they? I think that's a really also a good sign
Absolutely.
of the health of a small growing business. Do you think there's any particular channels? If you think about the sort of the digital marketing channels today, do you think there's any particular channels that are either underrated or overrated in your opinion, just out of interest?
I think that SEO is quite overrated, and the amount of effort it takes to get on those to build a credibility, to build domain authority for your website. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it's a bit overrated, and especially with a snap of their fingers, Google can change an algorithm, and all of a sudden, 30% of your traffic is gone. This happened with Reddit just a couple of months ago, or maybe last quarter, I think, which was they suffered a huge hit to their organic traffic because Google's algorithm changed. So now their engineers were running around trying to fix that, and they fixed it now. But that really impacted their business. And for me, there's also inherently a question of, do I want to be in that position with, organic traffic coming in from Google that can be disappearing on me with after I've put in so much effort into it?
I don't think you're alone. I think that that is, yes, a lot of people are quite disgruntled at how Google is basically keeping the clicks for themselves, keeping the traffic, the user for themselves. And I think what's interesting is, that wouldn't have seemed, like you say, there's so much investment to get that domain authority, and it takes so much time to try and win a spot on that first page. 10 years ago, we were used to that being a barrier everywhere, including in social, right? You have to build up a following before you've got any audience. But today, in social, because of the way the algorithms work in places like TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, you can go viral with 20 followers in theory. There is no barrier to entry at all in social other than good content. You don't have to build up any domain authority or any credibility score of any kind. You just have to turn up with good content. So in light of that, I can see why Google now seems like a very, very steep mountain to climb.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's taking longer and longer, and it's harder and harder. And then there's a lot on the technology side that we don't always talk about in SEO,
Mm.
how images are rendered, do you do server side versus not client versus client side. So there are a lot of other considerations technically that you've got to implement the right SEO structure. And to undo what you've done before takes a long, long time and it's expensive. So I don't think people appreciate or understand how expensive it really is. When we just look at our Google Analytics or any analytics tools that you use and you're looking at your traffic and conversion and everything else, you're basically saying, this traffic is free and therefore, any revenue we make from this traffic has much higher margin. And that's just not true because we don't put our staff costs and all other costs and tech costs, etc., into those reports. Fixed costs are never included, and there's a ton of fixed costs that go along with SEO. Your customers are your most underrated, resource. So if one is happy with you, another one will be recommended and come to you from that. And I think that referral programs, good referral programs, not the one that says, "Hey, refer me and you're going to get £5 off."
Mm.
I don't think that's the way to build loyalty. That's just trying to game it, and everybody knows it.
But you've got to work on your product, not your marketing, isn't it? You have to work on your product to achieve that effect so that people rave about it at their next dinner party. And then when you've worked on your product sufficiently, you've reached that bar, then any marketing you do or only amplifies the you know the delight and the willingness to advocate of people, doesn't it?
Yes, and I would also add that early on when we talk about how we approach customers and we try
Mm.
to elicit their help in helping us improve what we're delivering back to them, I think that is another way to get them to talk about you at the dinner party. It's not just the excellent experience that you build eventually as you get better and better, but
Mm.
even the early part of the journey and how well you're able to bring that to the customer and say, right, help me help you. And I've seen instances where those initial customers, because you spend one-on-one time engaging them, have become such strong advocates that the number of referrals they've given you is 10x times any other person giving you a referral.
Well, do you know what? Something else I want to ask you about, sort of related, but it's brand. It's the power of brand. You see that a lot where companies maybe don't always understand the value of something that doesn't hold tangible value. You can't, It's not like gold,
Yeah.
but
Or
it clearly has
Bitcoin.
value. In the same way, you look anywhere, right? Why do people spend $200 on a pair of Nike trainers when essentially it's probably worth, the constituent parts are worth about $5 or $10. So my question to you is, do you think about, in the startup world, do they worry about brand much? Is it all about customer acquisition?
It's all about customer acquisition. Brand is always important from the very first minute because what is a brand? Brand is the business. I often argue that brand strategy is the business strategy. So, for example, if your brand stands for trust, convenience, speed, agility, whatever that might be, that's your business. So you do everything you can to develop an experience or products or services. So early on in a business, brand is not so important. But I think as you get more and more into the uh, different stages, as you evolve, it becomes really important. And it's always important to reinforce that. People should be able to recognize your brand. Now, you might not do brand advertising. You might not, take out a full newspaper ad. You might not put a billboard or a bus or a metro or tube station or TV ad. That's not what brand marketing is. Brand marketing is living up to your brand promise. But if you don't know what that brand promise is at the early stages, you can't really create a brand on the back of a moving target. And that's why I think early on it's about acquiring customers, figuring out what you're doing right, what you need to improve on. And as you improve that, you need to evolve your brand behind the scenes. And then when you're ready and finally your product is pretty much not going to change much from where you're taking it to, where you're going full launch, you need to then really start to focus on brand.
Yes, I get that. It's so your urgency in those early stages is all the things you've talked about, isn't it? It's validating your product market fit. It's acquiring customers, working out what makes them excited, finding more of those people.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I get
mean,
that.
just recently, a founder of a business was trying to figure out what should be my company called because I need to then find a domain. And then he had a name set up in his mind, but he couldn't get the domain. So then he went back to the drawing board. And this is just too much waste of our headspace. It is not important. I mean, what is Yahoo? What is
No.
Google? Like all these things, they're not important. Once you have something, it'll become important, no matter what you call it. So it's very rare, unless you really go out of the way to sabotage what your brand might be in the future. Brands are becoming less and less um, different. Even Airbnb, streamlined their logo, which initially was a uppercase A and now it's just all
Yeah.
lowercase. So brands evolve over time. That's my point. And you don't need to worry about these small details. But the brand promise that you're making early on should probably stay more consistent and true to what values you're setting about for your business.
Yes. Yes. Um, so just thinking back over your career, I'm going to try and get you into reflective mode. What would you tell your younger self 20, 25 years ago that you know now?
Get a mentor early on.
Mm,
I didn't. I thought, you know, why do I need a mentor? What are they going to tell me that I don't already know? And that in itself is a problem because you feel that you know everything. Um, and so I didn't design my career probably in the same way that I would have if I had had a voice sort of echoing back or telling me, why are you doing it this way? Why is this the next role for you? So more and more it is important now to plan your career in a way where you don't get pigeonholed or you don't end up in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing that you end up saying, I really wish I hadn't gone into that.
I mean, how would one go about doing that? Literally just find someone that they admire in their particular niche.
I think that's one way of doing it. Looking into your network, finding someone you admire. The most important thing in finding a mentor or someone who can guide you is really finding someone who's aligned with your values, right?
Mm.
And so maybe even understanding your own values. What do you want from life? It's never too early to start thinking about those things, especially in our 20s. We're going through so many things. We're entering the job workforce. We're
Yeah.
making money after university for the first time. There's so many things and so many directions we can go in. The world is our oyster, right?
Yes, yes, true, true, true. Anything else from from an entrepreneurship or a marketing point of view?
In hindsight, and I wouldn't change anything about that. But I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, maybe start to plant seeds of how you get there early on. So don't get to a point like I did in my 30s and say, right, I'm going to start my own venture. Maybe work for another startup, in your late 20s or early 20s or mid 20s, whatever.
Yes, yeah. Um, do you think that it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, do you think that if you're going to do a startup in a certain sector, that you should have worked in that sector? Do you know? Would you sort of recommend doing that before starting your own thing?
It's always helpful, but I truly believe, especially in marketing, that a good marketeer should be able to work in any industry, any sector,
Yeah,
because in the end, the human psychology, is not different. Now, the channels might be different, the way you acquire customers and retain them might be different, but those are methodologies and those are tools. It's not the underlying change in anything else. So for at least for marketing,
well, yes, true. And I suppose just thinking about it there, you get to spend someone else's money, really, just to be really blunt about it. You get to learn with someone else's budgets and maybe within a bigger company anyway, bigger resources, and you can be a bit more judicious when it comes to your own very lean resources with a startup.
absolutely. But I think if you work in another startup for someone else, you're subject to just the same amount of scrutiny, in terms of spending.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But
Yes.
that's where I think I really had a sense of, at some of these big companies where I'm talking about, we spent millions a month on budget, right? And then when
Yeah.
I entered my own startup, it was like, well, hang on a minute, how much am I spending every day? And it was peanuts. So it really makes you think about where do you want to put your next dollar. And the biggest, sort of block that you have to overcome is to say, yes, I know that I have, let's say, 100 quid to spend, 100 pounds to spend, per day, let's say.
Mm.
Um, where am I going to spend it? Gosh, I don't want to spend it here. I don't want to spend it there. No, you've got to just say, right, it is 100 pounds. I'm going to spend the full 100 pounds here, and it's okay. And the next day you say, okay, well, yesterday's 100 pounds, they were wasted, so today I'm going to spend it somewhere else. And that's experimentation. You started off this conversation and you said,
Yeah.
well, in marketing, you don't really know what's going to work, until you actually do it. And that's exactly right.
It is. That's what keeps it fun. Um, well, look, I can see we're nearly out of time talking to you. It's been fascinating. There's so much more I could ask you for sure. But just to sort of bring it together a bit, we always ask at the end for a few top tips for someone starting a new venture of their own today. What would your main few nuggets of advice be for them?
The very first thing I would say is that you need to know the term we use, KYC. I say that that's not know your customers, it's know your co-founders. Because when you are
Yeah.
starting a new venture, you are getting into a marriage of sorts. Um, and I wish there was something, maybe I should coin this. It's called entrepreneurial prenup. You need to have that entrepreneurial prenup. And it's not about how are we going to divide equity. It's about how many hours of work are we going to put in? What are your beliefs about your work-life balance? Are you going to have family sometime soon? How much do you like to travel? Things that you really need to understand. It's not, when we're meeting up with colleagues and saying we should do this startup, it's really easy. You get along really well. You meet them up for drinks after work, and you're like, we should work on this together. You're this type of person, I'm this type of person. We would complement each other's skills. But those are the least of your problems. Finding people to complement your skills is the easy bit. The difficult bit here is to really figure out, are they really at the same level of of dedication, of engagement as you are? Are they going to move at the same speed as you are? So having that conversation and developing that engagement prenup is perhaps the biggest thing I can say for new businesses and founders who are starting off. The second thing I would say is, if you think you know your marketing budget, we all have assumptions. We have a business plan. We put all the rows. We have the months running across the top. We all put in a marketing budget there. If you think you know your marketing budget, just double it.
Wow.
That'll help you sleep better at night. And if you double it and you're not making money, then I would argue that maybe your business model is flawed. I know that's really harsh, and maybe I'm wrong in some cases, but generally, customer acquisition costs, people often underestimate how high they are. And they always move higher. They never go lower. I mean, you might have an initial S curve and you might have an initial sort of cut down in your acquisition costs, but eventually that'll go up again because you have other competitors doing the same thing, buying every single keyword they can find under the sun. That's
Mm.
going to raise your CPCs. So this will happen. So always be erring on the side of conservatism and mark up your customer acquisition costs. It'll serve you well. Um,
Mm.
and the last thing I would say is that don't rush into the fundraise, and maybe not all money is good money. And what I mean by that is sometimes businesses often say, "Oh, I'm getting some funding in, right?" But you're giving up something. So if you have so much conviction in your idea, think about that, giving up something. And many times the terms are really not favorable. So if this succeeds, you're going to have nothing, or they're going to own you, or they're going to impose their will upon you. So really understand who you're taking money from, whether you need the money or not. And most of the time you need that money. I'm not questioning that. But make sure that it's from the right source. Make sure that if you can raise from friends and family more and more than you do from a VC, for example.
Mm.
VCs are great, but it comes with its whole set of rules that make your life difficult as a founder, and maybe sometimes you're not ready for that.
Yes, yes. I've seen enough episodes of like Shark Tank and Dragon's Den where quite a lot of people get that advice. You don't actually need investment and you won't deal well with all the pressure that having VC style investors will put on you.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone, is it?
Sometimes it's also not serving your investor the same way.
Mm.
There was a point at which we needed to raise a second round of investment. So I went to angels before going to VCs. And I needed to raise a certain amount of money to execute the business plan we had. But we didn't get not nearly enough commitments to get all the way there. And so we would have fallen short on our business plan and ultimately would have fallen flat on our face. And we opted to actually walk away and just make a go of it on our own.
Wow.
Um, and it was more of a struggle, but it's better to build that healthier business with less money and maybe less profitability and maybe less growth.
So alluring, though, isn't it? The money, the green stuff. It's magnetic somehow.
Absolutely.
It's funny that. Well, okay. Well, thank you so much, Faisal. It's been a very fascinating conversation. Like I say, there's lots more I could have asked you. It's been a pleasure. We've learnt a lot. Just one last thing. Tell our listeners where they can find and connect with you online.
Well, they can go to LinkedIn and look me up there. My name is fairly unique, so I don't think there's too many people with that name. Or you can go to growthintl.co. That's growthintl.co.
Great. We will do that. We'll check that out and connect with you on LinkedIn. Thanks again, Faisal. Hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Will.